This video was created using artificial intelligence to recreate what everyday life and technology felt like in the early 2000s, drawing from... In this video, we'll take a closer look at the ideas, devices, and digital experiences that define the 2000s, exploring why they once felt...
At the beginning of the 2000s, the future was not invisible or seamless. It was physical, present, and impossible to ignore. It lived inside bedrooms, spare rooms, and small home offices, usually centered around a sturdy desk where a beige computer tower sat beneath, slightly warm even before it was fully awake. Turning it on was never silent. The machine announced itself with a low mechanical hum, a subtle vibration through the desk, and the slow awakening of a heavy CRT monitor that filled the room with a soft, flickering glow. This technology demanded patience. Nothing happened instantly. The screen took time to stabilize. Icons appeared one by one. The system felt alive, but only after a pause that invited anticipation. Around the computer, everyday life blended with technology. Stacks of CDs in plastic sleeves, handwritten passwords on scraps of paper, thick instruction manuals that were rarely read from beginning to end, and a tangle of cables that never seemed perfectly organized. The workspace was rarely clean, not from neglect, but because technology itself had not yet learned how to disappear into daily life. Then came the most recognizable ritual of that era, connecting to the internet. The dial-up modem did not whisper. It filled the room, sometimes the entire house, with metallic tones, static bursts, and rhythmic beeps that signaled something important was about to happen. Going online was a decision. It often meant blocking the phone line, waiting patiently, and hoping the connection would succeed on the first attempt. That waiting shaped behavior. While pages loaded slowly, people leaned back in their chairs, listened to the hum of the machine, and watched text and images appear line by line. Being online was not constant, it was intentional, and because access was limited, it felt valuable. In those moments, surrounded by glowing screens and quiet mechanical sounds, the future didn't feel fast, but it felt real, reachable, and full of promise. In the early 2000s, everyday life was shaped by a quiet but persistent sense of technological optimism. New devices entered homes regularly, and people welcomed them with curiosity rather than suspicion. Technology did not feel intrusive. It felt promising. Even when it was confusing or limited, it carried the belief that things were moving forward. Using new technology required learning. Sending a text message meant pressing the same key multiple times, carefully watching each letter appear. Mistakes were common, and correcting them took time. Music was not instantly available. It had to be transferred, organized, renamed, and sometimes reloaded after an error. Installing a new device often involved software disks, restarts, and moments of uncertainty while waiting to see if everything would work as expected. These small inconveniences were not seen as failures. They were part of the experience. People felt involved in the process, as if they were learning alongside the technology itself. Ownership came with responsibility. You needed to understand your devices, remember how they worked, and accept their limitations. Carrying multiple gadgets was normal and even desirable. A phone for calls, a separate device for music, another for photos, sometimes a pager or a personal organizer. Each object had a single purpose, and that simplicity gave it value. Switching between devices felt intentional, not excessive. There was a shared sense that the future was being built piece by piece, right inside everyday routines. Technology did not promise perfection, it promised progress, and for many people that was more than enough. In the early 2000s, communication did not live inside a single device. It was spread across many tools, each one designed for a specific purpose. This fragmentation felt normal. In fact, it felt advanced. A pager clipped to a belt signaled urgency. A flip phone provided short calls and carefully typed messages. A PDA stored contacts, schedules, and notes, acting as a digital extension of a paper planner. These devices were not redundant, they complemented one another. People moved through their day switching between tools, each interaction deliberate. Opening a flip phone was a physical action with weight and sound. Using a stylus on a PDA required precision and focus. Communication felt tactile. something you did with your hands as much as with your attention. At home or in shared spaces, instant messaging platforms introduced a new rhythm of social interaction. Logging in mattered. Seeing a familiar username appear online carried meaning. Status messages were brief but expressive, offering small windows into someone's mood or availability. Conversations unfolded slowly, line by line, leaving space between responses. Silence did not imply absence, it simply meant waiting. These systems created presence without proximity, a powerful idea at the time. Yet they depended on specific software, platforms, and habits. As technology advanced and began merging these functions into fewer devices, many of these tools lost their place. They did not fail publicly or dramatically, they simply became unnecessary. And almost overnight, an entire ecosystem of communication quietly faded into memory. In the early 2000s, consumer technology carried a strong sense of anticipation. Buying a new device was not just about solving a problem, it was about experiencing what the future might feel like. Electronic stores were filled with products that looked advanced, sometimes even intimidating, promising to transform everyday routines in visible ways. Portable DVD players were one of the clearest symbols of that moment. They turned cars, airport seats, and living room floors into personal viewing spaces. Watching a movie was no longer tied to a fixed television. The screen folded open, the disc spun inside, and entertainment followed you wherever you went. Even with limited battery life and fragile hinges, the idea itself felt revolutionary. At home, rear projection televisions dominated living rooms. They were massive, deep, and heavy, often becoming the visual center of the house. Families arranged furniture around them. Turning one on felt like starting an event. These televisions promised cinema-scale experiences, even if the image required careful adjustment and the hardware took up half the room. Music and photography were also in transition. MP3 players offered freedom from shelves of CDs, but required careful organization, file transfers, and constant management of storage limits. Digital cameras removed film from the equation, yet introduced new rituals: checking batteries, managing memory cards, connecting thick cables to computers, and waiting for photos to slowly transfer. None of these products were failures. They were bridges between eras. Each one solved a problem temporarily, using the best tools available at the time. They disappeared not because they were useless, but because progress kept moving. What once felt futuristic quickly became a stepping stone, quietly replaced by something smaller, simpler, and more integrated. In the early 2000s, the internet did not feel finished. It felt experimental, unstable, and constantly changing. There was no single dominant platform, no clear rules, and no guarantee that the websites people use today would still exist tomorrow. Every visit online carried a sense of uncertainty and discovery. Web pages loaded slowly, often revealing themselves piece by piece. Images appeared line by line. Links sometimes led to errors, broken pages, or sites that no longer existed. Yet this unpredictability was part of the experience. The internet felt less like a utility and more like a place you explored without a map. Users relied on bookmarks, word of mouth, and curiosity to find new spaces. Search engines competed for relevance. Online stores experimented with layouts, payment systems, and trust. Music sharing platforms reshaped how people thought about access, ownership, and control. Forums became digital meeting places where conversations unfolded over days or even weeks, not seconds. Participation felt slower, but also more deliberate. Online identity was something you actively built. Profiles were customized manually. Backgrounds, layouts, and personal descriptions reflected taste and personality. There were no algorithms deciding what mattered most. Visibility came from effort, not automation. Many of these platforms disappeared quickly. Some lasted only a few years, others only months. But they were not meaningless experiments. They taught an entire generation how to navigate digital spaces, how to connect with strangers, and how to exist online. The early internet was unfinished, and that was exactly what made it exciting. In the early 2000s, technology did not replace social life. Instead, it slowly wove itself into it. Social interaction existed in a space between the physical and the digital, where screens supported relationships rather than replacing them. Being online was often a shared experience, something people did together in the same room. LAN houses became modern meeting points. Rows of computers, the constant hum of fans, the glow of CRT monitors, and the sound of keyboards filled these spaces. Friends arrived together, chose nearby stations, and leaned toward their screens while still talking to one another. Games, chats, and downloads happened side by side. The internet was fast there, but the social experience was physical and immediate. At home, the family computer occupied a central place. It was rarely private. Siblings waited their turn, friends gathered around a single screen. Conversations flowed between typing and speaking out loud. Someone would point at the monitor, another would take the mouse, another would watch and comment. Technology became a shared object, not a personal extension. Online spaces mirrored this balance. Chat rooms, forums, and early social platforms created new ways to connect, but they did not erase face-to-face interaction. Online conversations often continued offline, and offline relationships extended into digital spaces. The boundary between the two worlds was thin and flexible. This period captured a unique moment in social history. Technology felt exciting but not isolating. It added layers to human connection without replacing it. Screens brought people together, and the digital world still felt closely tied to physical presence, shared spaces, and real-time interaction. As the early 2000s moved forward, a quiet shift began to take shape. Technology started to simplify itself. Devices that once lived separately began to merge, slowly absorbing the functions of others. What had previously required several tools started to fit into fewer objects, and eventually into just one. At first, this change was subtle. Phones began to store contacts more efficiently, music players gained more storage, cameras became easier to connect. Each improvement seemed small, but together they signaled a larger transformation. The logic of carrying multiple devices started to feel less necessary, even if it still felt familiar. This convergence was not announced. There was no clear moment when people decided to abandon older tools. Instead, habits changed quietly. A device was used less often. Another stayed in a drawer a little longer. Cables were no longer plugged in daily. Chargers stopped traveling everywhere. What made this shift significant was not just convenience, but integration. When one device could handle communication, music, photos, and organization, the older single-purpose tools lost their place. They were not broken, they were simply no longer needed. This was a turning point. Technology stopped feeling experimental and started feeling streamlined. Progress became smoother, faster, and less visible. And in that smoothness, many once essential ideas began to fade, not as failures, but as signs that their role in shaping the future had already been fulfilled. Most of the innovative ideas from the early 2000s did not disappear in dramatic ways. There were no announcements, no final versions, no sense of closure. Instead, they faded quietly, almost politely, as if stepping aside for something newer. One year they were part of daily life. Soon after, they were simply no longer there. This disappearance often went unnoticed because replacement happened quickly. A new device arrived that did more with less effort. A new service worked faster, required fewer steps, or removed the need for cables, disks, or adapters. The old tools were not immediately thrown away. They were placed in drawers, shelves, and boxes, kept just in case. Over time, those drawers became archives. Inside them were flip phones that still powered on, MP3 players with forgotten playlists, compact cameras with depleted batteries, and cables whose purpose was no longer clear. These objects were not broken. They were simply disconnected from everyday routines. What made this moment unique was how natural it felt. Progress did not demand attention. It did not ask permission. It moved forward quietly, and people followed without resistance. The tools that once felt essential lost their urgency. Days passed without using them, then weeks, then years. This silent disappearance marked the end of an era defined by visible, tangible technology. Innovation no longer needed to announce itself through new objects on a desk. It became smoother, faster, and less noticeable. And in that quiet transition, many ideas that once felt revolutionary slipped into memory, not as failures, but as completed experiments. Looking back from the present, the technologies of the early 2000s often appear bulky, slow, and unnecessarily complicated. Devices required cables, adapters, batteries, and patience. Software demanded updates, installations, and restarts. From today's perspective, it is easy to see these limitations and wonder how they were ever considered advanced. But this view is shaped by distance. At the time, these technologies felt normal. More than that, they felt impressive. They solved real problems in visible ways. Carrying multiple devices was not inconvenient. It was a sign of being connected, prepared, and modern. Each object represented a specific capability, something tangible you could hold and understand. What stands out today is how present technology has become invisible. Functions that once required separate tools are now merged into smooth, silent systems. The complexity has not disappeared, but it has been hidden. In contrast, early 2000s technology exposed its inner workings. You saw loading screens, you heard mechanical sounds, you waited. That visibility created a different relationship with innovation. People understood their tools because they had to. Technology demanded attention and involvement. It asked users to adapt, learn, and occasionally struggle. Those struggles were part of the experience, not flaws to be erased. When we look back now, these devices are more than outdated objects. They are markers of a transitional era, a time when the future was still something you could see, hear, and touch. They remind us that progress once felt slower, louder, and more human, and that what we call obsolete today was once the cutting edge of possibility. The innovative ideas of the early 2000s did not disappear because they failed. Most of them worked exactly as intended. They solved problems, introduced new habits, and changed the way people interacted with technology. Their disappearance was not a rejection, it was a consequence of success. Each idea pushed the next one forward, even if it meant being left behind. These technologies belong to a moment when progress was visible. You could see it on your desk, hear it powering on, feel it in your hands. The future arrived in pieces: a new device, a new cable, a new sound. Innovation did not hide itself. It asked for space, attention, and time, and people gave it willingly. As the years passed, those objects slowly lost their place in everyday life. They moved from desks to drawers, from drawers to boxes, from boxes to memories. Yet they were not forgotten. They remained as quiet reminders of a time when technology felt experimental, imperfect, and deeply human. Looking back, these ideas represent more than obsolete gadgets. They capture a mindset, a willingness to try, to adapt, and to believe that change was always just one update away. They remind us that progress is not a straight line, but a series of attempts, each one shaped by the limitations and hopes of its time. One day, the technologies we rely on now will follow the same path. They too will rest quietly, remembered not for their flaws, but for how they once felt essential. Because every future, no matter how advanced, eventually becomes a memory. And every memory carries the story of a moment when the world was still figuring out what came next.